In this video, we are going to be making our popular Adirondack chair. I have two of them to make for a customer, as well as a sofa. And there is a link in the description below to purchase the plans. They're $5. And the plans do include all the dimensions and angles for the chair, and the sofa, and the kids chair as well. Okay, so we have those available to you in the description below. So the adult chairs require 5 fence pickets and the and 2 2x4s. Okay, if you want to use 2x3s, you could use that as well. So sometimes I will, just kind of depends on what I have on hand here. Sometimes I will use 2x3s, but in this case we're using 2x4s. So I'm going to go through the parts with you just real quickly, and then I'll show you how it all goes together. So first of all, we're using 6-foot treated fence pickets. So this will make up the back of our chair. We need 3 pieces that are 35 inches long. And then these make up the arms of our chair. Now there's some additional cutting we'll have to do on these, but we'll explain that when we get there. But those are 28 inches long. And then we need 4 pieces that will make up the seat, which will be 20 inches. And these will have to be ripped to size, and some additional milling on those as well. Now over here, I've done some of the work already as far as the milling work goes. The 2 long boards here, from the very tip to the very tip, is 33.5. This is a 20-degree miter, and you can see that that miter is going the same angle. So from this very tip to that very tip, 33.5. Okay, and then this piece here is 28 inches long. And what I've done here is, in the table saw, I set my blade angle at 20 degrees and cut that. So this is 3.5 inches wide, 28 inches long, and I put a 20-degree bevel on that. These 2 pieces are 23.5 inches. This will make up our front legs. And then this piece here is 23 inches, and this piece here is 20. So you can see there's not a lot of parts. The 5 fence pickets, they're about $2 a piece right now, so that's going to cost you $10. Your 2x4s are about $5 a piece. It takes 2 of them, so that's going to cost you $10. So all in here, we've got about $25 invested in material. I sell the adult chairs for $89, and I sell the adult sofa for $129. Now I will be doing the video for the sofa in a separate video. And one other thing to point out, we do actually have another video where we built these Adirondack chairs. I sometimes like to repeat videos of past projects because I might describe it differently, or show you something in this one that I didn't show you in that one. And sometimes, depending on the project, I figure out better ways of doing things the more I build them. So I don't know, I like to watch videos on multiple different videos on the same particular project to get different ideas from different people. So at any rate, what we're going to do now is we're going to cut off. We got to cut off just a little bit here. And so what I did is I measured down from here 3 inches, and then I just used my carpenter square here just to mark that. So I'm going to grab my skill saw and just nip that off real quick, and then we can go ahead and take a look at, start putting this together. Okay, so you can see how we took that off. We've given everything a nice light sand, so all of our 2x4 pieces, you can see we've kind of rounded off all of our ends, and so now we're ready to begin assembly. So the first step is to take our 2 main leg support pieces here, and from this tip you can kind of see how I have them oriented on the workbench here. We come back to 18 inches. Okay, and so then what we're going to do is we're going to take the 20-inch piece, and right there at that 18-inch mark, flush out here, we're going to put in 2 screws. Now, as a general rule of thumb, what I recommend doing is using the longest screw that you have. Could you use 2.5-inch screws here? You certainly could. I prefer to use 3.5-inch screws, but I also have lots of these 4-inch and 4.5-inch variety. So because I have the room here, I'm going to go ahead and use these 4-inch screws because I bought a bunch of these from a reseller. So I have a lot of boxes of those I need to use up. So just use the longest screw that you got, okay? So flush out here on this side, flush to this side with our 20-inch board, step 1. So you can see we're flush here, on the line there, on the line here, and flush on this side. What I'll do is I'll put in 1 screw, and then I'll just use my carpenter square here and make sure it's nice and square, and then put in the secondary screw. Same thing on this side. I'll put in the screw nearest the line and then make sure that we are square, and then put in the secondary screw. So good idea to do that. So the next step then is to use our 23.5-inch boards and put on the front legs. So I'll show you how we do that there. So here I have my 2 23.5-inch boards, and I've measured up from the bottom up 14 inches using my carpenter square and draw a line across both of these. And now we're going to use this to go ahead and attach to our leg supports here. Now I just showed you this as an alternative, something to think about. So for this leg, all I did was I just slid this underneath this support, and I put a little piece of scrap back there just to kind of support it, and then put the screws basically from the inside, so you wouldn't see these screws on the outside. So if that's something that is of concern to you, with these screws showing on the outside, you could do it this way and then flip it over, do it the same way, and put the screws in from the inside, and then you wouldn't see them. So to me, that's not that big a deal. One other thing you could do is run 2 screws from the outside, 2 screws from the inside for a little extra support there, if you felt like it needed it. But I don't think it does, so that's typically how I would just drive them from the outside. I don't think it's that big a deal, but just something I thought I would show you as an alternative. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cap these with our 23-inch piece. So I will go ahead and do that. So you can see we now have our 23-inch piece. We're flush on the 2 outsides here. I've ran in 2 4-inch screws here and here, 4-inch screws here and here. All right, so now our next step then would be to go ahead and do some milling for the arms of the chair and get those installed. So I will set this assembly aside for a second and work on getting our arms finished up here. Okay, so let me show you what I've done here. These are our 28-inch boards, and I've come down from the top 4 inches and put a mark using my carpenter square. Then I put a mark at 2 inches. Then I've just taken the other board, used this as a straight edge to connect that and that to draw our line. Then we'll cut that out with our skill saw. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get those cut, then I'll get them all sanded up, make them look pretty, and then we'll install it on our chair base. Okay, so you can see I do have my arms mounted to my front legs here, and what I did were flush out here, and I just used a scrap piece of wood to have an 1.5 inch offset off the front edge here. And then I popped in 2 staples just to hold it temporarily. Now I am going to take 1 2.5-inch screw and put it right here in the front, because I want that to be adjustable back there. Okay, so just get a 2.5-inch screw right where that staple is, and pop in one screw right there before we put on our cross piece back here. Okay, so now we have our 28-inch piece, and what I've done is I've come in here and marked 4 inches, that will leave us 20. Okay, and remember, from the inside edge to the inside edge of our arms, we have 20. So that should all line up. Now what I've also done is use my carpenter square. You can see how I've come in 1 inch and make a little tiny tick mark, okay? So now I will go ahead and attach this piece to the arms, and I'll show you how we do that. So when you're working by yourself, you kind of need 2 or 3 hands, right? But this is a simple way to accomplish this. So you can see how I actually set this backer board on top of this arm, but it's underneath this one, okay? And see that tick mark right there that we made at that 4 inches? Okay, so that should be right in line with this arm. And then on the back, you can see that those 2 tick marks line up, okay? The 1 inch, so this backboard should be at 1 inch, okay? And so now I took one staple, popped in one staple, and then what we're gonna do is you could swing this around and under and line up those tick marks, and then we can push this arm in or out as needed so everything lines up, and then we can go ahead and pop in one staple. Then we'll come back in with some 1 5/8 screws and make that permanent. Okay, so you can see how we've got everything. Now, I would recommend, especially here, go ahead and use a pilot hole, because you can see how that kind of cracked right there. That's kind of a no-no. But I'm not too worried about it. I did use a little bit of wood glue, so it's not that big a deal. But probably not a bad idea to use a pilot hole countersink bit there. Okay? So now the next step that we're going to do is kind of optional. I'm going to go ahead and do it. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to make, because I build a lot of these, we're going to make a wedge so that, because see, this has some flex to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a wedge that will make sure that this is completely horizontal, you know, square. It is more or less already, but I'll show you what I mean, that I think is a good idea for you to make. Okay, so I have one wedge in place. Of course, this is just temporary. And you know, I said that these were more or less horizontal. And so they more or less are. But when we go to put in our back piece, we just want to make sure that those are square. So what this piece is, we've got a 20-degree bevel here, just some scrap 2x4. And then from that point to that point is 16 5/8. Okay, so then we could just put it in there. And then when we go to attach our back piece from this piece to this piece, we could just push down on that a little bit. And then we know that those will be perfectly horizontal and in perfect position. So, not a big deal, but surely you've got some scrap boards laying about, just to make those a little bit easier. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, on our bottom piece here, we know that's 20 inches wide, so we're going to come over and find center and place our first backboard on center. And we're going to do that just by using our staple gun. We'll put in 2 staples at the bottom once we center the board up on this one. Then we'll use our carpenter square and make sure everything's nice and square, and pop 2 staples up here while pushing down on this, and then we know that our arms will be perfectly horizontal. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that done. Okay, so I would recommend that you sand your boards now, clean them up a little bit. If there is a cup in your board, which there is a slight cup in this one, then I would just have it crowned, you know, out instead of the other way around. It would make it for a more comfortable chair. But so you can see what I do. I just kind of set this board on top. There's my 10-inch mark. And then I'll position my board where I think the center of this board is. I don't necessarily measure, I just use my eye. Then once I'm happy with it, I'll bring it down and take this first board flush to the bottom of this. Pop in 2 staples. Now push down up here, pop in 2 staples, and then we'll come back at the end and put in our 1 5/8" screws to make it all permanent. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now this board is in place, and I use my carpenter square up top here. You can see that there. Make sure that board is nice and square. So I'll put in 1 staple, I'll square up the board, then go ahead and put in the other staple. Then we've got 2 staples up here as well. Now the other 2 boards, we're going to line up to the top here. So wherever it ends at the bottom. But up top, they got to line up. And of course, they're going to butt up right to this one. So I'll go ahead and get that done. Okay, you can see we have our 3 backboards in now. And they all line up top here. And now on the back side here, I've gone ahead and added our little cleat. So this is just 2.5 inches wide, piece of scrap. You can see I've got it everywhere around here. And came in, I just eyeballed. This is 14 inches, this is 16.5. So now it's roughly 1.25 inches in. But I just took this block and lined it up top and then drew 2 lines. And then so I dropped it down 2.5 inches. I've got it put in here with some 1-inch staples. We'll come back in at the very end, put in some 1-inch screws there. And that will take care of this. So now we have to focus on our seat. And our seat, you can see how this all comes together pretty quickly. So our seat boards are 19 7/8. I make them just 1/8 of an inch shy, just so they lay in there nice and easy. And then the first thing we have to do is we have to set up our table saw to give us a 2-inch board with a 10-degree miter, the length of the board. So let me do that first, and I'll show you exactly what we're going to do. Okay, so there's our board. You can see we have a 10-degree miter out front, and that's exactly how it's going to go on the chair. And this one, we're going to flip over, and that's also 10 degrees. 10 and 10 is 20. So you'll see how that works out when we get it put on the chair. So you can see I have our first piece installed on our chair. Again, we're just using a couple of staples to hold it in place. But what I want to show you is the bottom of that bevel is right in line with this. Okay, so that 10-degree miter is going this way. Okay, and then the 10-degree miter is going the opposite direction. So this 10-degree miter is going this way. So when we line those 2 up, you can see they line up perfectly, because remember our legs are at 20, so 10 and 10 obviously is 20. So I'll go ahead and put that together with a couple of staples, and I'll make sure I sand that crease real good so there's no pinching and everything is nice and smooth right there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get that in place. Okay, so what we have left here is to measure that, and we have slightly over 14 inches. Like it's about 14 and an eighth or so. All right, well, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rip my 3 boards that I have left to 4 5/8. Then they should fit right in there and have a small gap on the back side where the water can drain off onto. All right, so I'll go ahead and rip those on the table saw to 4 5/8, and we'll get those in place. Okay, so we have all of our seat boards in. They all fit perfectly. So our next step then is to put in our arm supports. Now, our arm support will differ depending on if we are doing a cup holder or not. In this particular case, we are not putting cup holders in. So we're just going to do our standard arm support. So I will show you how we do that with some scrap 2x4. I have to preface this next step is do not do this at home, folks. Okay, so be careful, all right? Because this is a wicked tool, and you don't want to get your fingers caught in it. Trust me. All right. I actually did one time. I've been using the table saw for years and years and years, and one time I did actually nip my finger on my table saw, and it did not feel good. So what we're doing is take a piece of scrap. Now I could have used a long piece of scrap, and I would recommend, you using maybe 16 or 18 inch board, something longer than what I'm going to use. Okay, that will help keep your hands away from the blade too. But what I've done is I've come down here and I've measured 8 inches. Then I've come in 1.5 inches on this side and 1.5 inches on this side and connected the dots. Okay. And so what we're going to do, we're going to put it in our table saw like this, and we're going to be using our compound action to cut along that line. Okay. And so I'm going to be holding on out here, where if I had a longer stick, I'd be way out here. Okay. So anyhow, just make sure you're holding on tight to your piece. Make sure you go nice and slow. Don't try to cut all the way through on your first pass. Take it easy on your miter saw and go ahead and cut that. Okay, but again, be careful. Okay, definitely be careful. You could actually set up a whole jig on the table saw, like a leg tapering jig if you have one. I actually have one somewhere. But I don't hardly ever use it. But this would be a case where it might be useful to break out the leg tapering jig and do it on the table saw. That'd be a little bit safer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut that along that line there. And then I'll cut along this line. And then we'll have 2 8-inch blocks for our arm supports. All right, so we have our 2 arm supports now. I did not need to go to the emergency room. I still have all my fingers. So that's good. So one other little caveat to point out, you could do this with 2x6s too. If you had a piece of scrap 2x6, that would just give you more of a support. So if you have it, that's great. So you see what I've done over here. I've just taken a 2.5 inch screw down about 4 inches and centered left to right here, and got it started on both sides. And I'm just going to hold my block up there, and I'm going to put a screw in here, and then I'm going to put a screw down through the top, and then we're going to go ahead and put in another screw where that other staple is for our arms. Okay, and that will hold our support in place. So I'll go ahead and get that done. Well, there you go. That's what it looks like when we have our supports in place. If I had to do it over, I'd probably go down 6 inches instead of 4 on the supports. But otherwise, that's basically what it looks like. So the only thing that's really left to do on this is to go ahead and get my pilot drill out and drill everywhere I have staples, 2 per board, 3 across the front there, and then along the bottom edge there and along here. And remember that cleat on the back side. I'd pilot hole all of that. Everything on the front side here, we're using 1 5/8. And on the back side, we have to use 1 inch. But then this chair will be complete. So I'll show you what it looks like when we get all that done, get it all staged up, and take one final look at the project. So there we go. We've got our chairs all finished up. And you can see that we added all of our 1 5/8 screws along the bottom, along the back there. Got the screws in the arms on both of them. So that's what they look like, all finished up. And then, of course, we also have our sofa done. So again, the plans do come with the sofa and the adult size and kid size chairs. And then we even have a little miniature Adirondack chair that we use for a little planter that we give you the plans for as well. And we actually have a video on that too. If you type in Adirondack planter or something like that, it'll show you how to make that. But the plans for all the different sizes come all together. So that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you give it a try. Thanks for watching.